Welcome to our regular iSpring webinar series where we discuss e-learning trends, share tips and tricks, and highlight client success stories. My name is Helen. I'm community manager at iSpring and your moderator for today's session. And today's topic is 10 mistakes we made before becoming instructional designers. And now let me introduce you to our valuable guests, instructional designers Holly Owens and Sam Taylor. Hi Holly, hi Sam, how are you doing today?
Hello, hello. I'm doing great.
Hi. Great. Ready to share all the mistakes.
Yes, it's hard to stop at just 10, but
It
I think we
is.
can do.
I feel the same way.
That's great. I am so excited about today's webinar, and it's time for our guests to take the stage.
Woohoo. We're ready. I'm ready.
Yes,
So hi
yes, yes, yes.
everyone. Sam and I are definitely ready, and we just met at DevLearn a couple weeks ago to talk about some of the mistakes that we made in getting into the field of learning and development, specifically instructional design. So this is going to go a little bit like a podcast episode where I'll be the host and Sam will be answering the questions, but I will be, filling in some of the gaps or things that I've experienced as well. And we would love for you in the chat if you could tell us, your role and any mistakes that you made getting into this role so you can join in on the conversation as well. So one of the first questions I have, Sam, is before we even jump into the mistakes, let's not go there quite yet. I want to know a little bit more about your background, what inspired you to pursue instructional design, and how did your journey begin there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started off my career as a middle school science teacher. And so I was a teacher for 4+ years. I was teaching in Nevada, and then I moved back to California. And during that time, I started teaching in California, but I realized maybe it was time for me to try something a little bit different. I just wanted to, try something new after a few years. And so I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So I started teaching myself web development, like coding, because I was like, oh, I'm in California, everyone's coding. I'm going to try it
Silicon
myself.
Valley, yeah, all those different things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like the first thing that came to my head. But, I was still teaching. So as I was teaching, I was teaching myself to code, and I kept a blog. So this blog was like me basically keeping track of everything I was learning as I was coding. So I started building this coding blog. It's like coding tutorials, screenshots, learning web development for myself. And so I thought that I wanted to be a web developer after I was teaching. But then I realized that might not be for me. And, I knew I wanted to take a break from the classroom. So I just started going on LinkedIn and searching up jobs that I could get as a teacher and with some technical skills. And I came across, instructional design, learning and development. I came across like curriculum developer, all of those like titles that were really enticing because it was a perfect blend of like, being able to still teach and create curriculum and be creative, but it was just a different audience. So I think, having this blog of all these like tutorials, basically me writing docs and writing curriculum for myself for this, like teaching myself how to code, really served as like a nice portfolio, which then helped me get my foot in the door.
Yeah, I would say so.
I applied for like an ed tech company doing like contract work, doing like writing test questions for middle school science standards. And so then I got that like ed tech experience on my resume, and it kind of just snowballed from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's important to mention that we're both transition teachers. Kind of did it before. I kind of did it before. It was the cool thing to do at this point in instructional design. And just kind of the same situation with you, like falling in love with ed tech and figuring out what I could do training wise and kind of building myself up from there. And then eventually evolving into the instructional design role. And it like you said, it kind of just snowballed from there. And I think maybe one of the mistakes to mention at this point, just talking about our intros, is the fact that maybe not some people kind of turn away from contract work And I think that is something that you should not do, because on your
Right.
resume, it looks good. Like you're saying, you should have that experience. So mistake number one, don't turn away from contract work.
Yeah.
As much as it's like scary in that arena to kind of rely on contract work to sustain your lifestyle and your family and things, it gives you that experience. I don't know. Would you agree, Sam?
Yeah, and I think there's two ways you could probably go about it. One is if you're like ready to make the full leap, is like go full time, contract work where that's your only source of income. But there's also I think with certain ed tech companies where you can do like the kind of part time contractor pay per question role, which is
Yeah.
another option as well.
Hmm.
But yes,
Definitely.
definitely don't discount contract work.
Yeah, mistake number one, turning away contract work, because it is so valuable. And I've actually, before I landed the role where I am now, I did some more contract work again, just to kind of make sure that my skills were still there in terms of like project management and managing my time. So I think that is definitely something important. So tell us a little bit more about, what are some of like maybe the key mistakes that you made early on? And, you know, when you're thinking about landing a role in instructional design, there's so many facets to it. So what are some of those
Yeah.
mistakes that you made, and kind of how did you deal with all the facets that were part of instructional design or the ed tech world?
Yeah, so I can talk first about some of the mistakes I made when I was applying to instructional design roles
That's great.
as a teacher. And then we'll talk about some of the, once I got my first job, some of the mistakes I made there. So
Yeah,
the
perfect.
first, when I was applying to my first instructional design roles, I think the biggest mistakes that I was making was I was not curating my resume for instructional design roles. I was basically using my teacher resume, which would have gotten me probably a few jobs in other schools, but you want to really craft your resume for the job that you want and not the job that you already have. So, it was really hard for me. I was, so passionate about my kids and my classroom experience that my whole resume read, did X, Y, and Z for the sixth grade science class, increase literacy by, whatever percent,
Very
design
corporate-y.
curriculum. Yeah, it didn't quite fit what I needed for instructional design. And I think once I took a step back and started looking at some of the job listings on LinkedIn and seeing, how they were phrasing the experiences that they were hoping for, I was able to then craft my resume to more closer align with what, an instructional design role needed versus like what a teacher resume and a teacher role needed. So that
I
was a
think
big one. I
sometimes.
was really holding on. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's a difficult one, and I think that's probably one of the most challenging things coming out of the classroom is like, it's kind of when I talk to my graduate students transitioning from pedagogy to andragogy, and like talking about that transition from teaching younger learners to teaching adult learners, it's so difficult to kind of hone in on those transferable skills and leave the you not say leave the teaching, because I always tell people to honor their experience, but kind of write it in a way where it's more in that realm. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, like, I was conducting Zoom classes and Zoom lessons for my students, but you can rewrite it as, conducting live training sessions for audience of, X amount of people. And that's just more for me personally, that had been a more effective way to share my experience of, like leading Zoom lesson, teaching virtually. So yeah, just really making sure I can let go of some of the hold I have on my teacher resume and reformatting it a bit to an instructional design resume. Another
Absolutely.
mistake that I made when I was transitioning was I remember I didn't practice any interview questions because I think as when I was interviewing for like teaching positions, it'd be kind of a more casual conversation in person. You'd be talking about what I did at this other school. But transitioning to instructional design, specifically in the tech world, it was very formal. And that was not something I was prepared for. And, I would be just taking these phone interview screens, like just walking down the street. I would, I wasn't like prepared for the level, like the high level of, I guess, professionalism that, I was also younger, so I wasn't really prepared for that. So I think, making sure that I prepared for interviews is something that I made a mistake of when I first got started. But, once you get a list of like most commonly asked instructional design questions and you can really like practice them and rehearse them and come up with your own answers, I think then that can really help you succeed as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. And like, it's a different kind of situation when you're interviewing for instructional design stuff. They want examples, they want, situations that you've been in. It's very, like I had to deal with this difficult person or this me, and they want, and we did iSpring and I did a webinar recently with instructional design interview questions and how to answer them. I know there's some older ones out there too, but it really hones in on like what you need to do in order to prepare for these questions that
Yeah.
you're about to be asked that you may have never been asked in your teaching career or other career
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it just comes with experience because you don't know what you don't know. Like, I think the only way I would have known that I wasn't prepared is if I had an interview where I was unprepared. And then I was like, oh, like these were the questions they asked me. Let me jot them down for
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, and obviously too, like once you prepare for the role, you get into these interviews. There's a lot that entails, and we could go into a whole situation about how many rounds and things like that that you need to prepare for. And oftentimes, instructional designers are asked to do some sort of project when it comes
Yeah.
to the interview rounds. So one of the things, after you land the role, like what are some of the things that you encounter or the mistakes that you made? And I do want to point out, people are asking about in the chat
Oh, yeah.
about
We can take a look at
do
that.
either of you, did we do programs like we'll answer this live right now. Did we do any programs like a postgraduate certificate or just teach yourself, and how did you know what to learn? That's a good question.
That's a great question. So while I was teaching, I was also doing a master's in education, curriculum design and instruction, but the focus was primarily K-12. So that was pretty much the only like higher level education, but that also wasn't to become an instructional designer. That was just because I was a fresh teacher wanting to like finish up my master's degree. And how did I know what to learn? Honestly, I was really lucky with my first big role in that I had some great mentors that were more experienced, and they were like, okay, you need to learn how to edit videos immediately. You need to learn how to use these tools immediately. And so then I just like would spend my time diving into them. But I don't know if
Yeah.
that's the same for you.
Very much the same. As a teacher, they have salary bumps once you get that master's degree.
Yeah.
So that was my intention starting out. So I have two master's degrees, one in instructional technology, which has definitely become more instructional design, and the other one is in distance education, which is obviously online learning at this point. And really, those did help me working in the academic space because academia appreciates the credentials.
Yeah.
And also too, my most recent stint with Amazon, I noticed that 50% of my team was former educators. And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and most of us had master's degrees, but the people on the non education people, they didn't really have the same credentials we had. So it depends on where you go, like what the credential needs to be. But I would say it doesn't hurt to kind of do those things. Somebody was mentioning, I think Jill was mentioning in the chat, she's doing on a micro master certificate, which I think is great, especially if
Oh,
you're going
nice.
into the education space.
Yeah. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
that actually my sister is also in L&D, and she was able to do like one of those credentials at like the secondary university, or I forget what they're called, but yeah, like certificate program, and that has been really useful for her.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like now I'm stepping into the marketing realm, so I'm definitely going to do some sort of certificate, just like I did with instructional design, kind of figuring out my way through. So as you landed the role, Sam, and you started getting into like the onboarding and getting comfortable in the instructional design space, I always say coming out of the classroom is like a traumatic experience because you're not on the front lines anymore. You're not with your learners necessarily,
Yeah,
doing all the things
totally.
yourself. So can you talk a little bit about the mistakes that might have happened as you were landing the role and onboarding?
Yeah, I think, I was definitely carrying all of that, like, teacher, I'm here, I can do it all, I'm going to save everyone and like do all the things that you can rely on me. I went in with that energy and that caused me to burn out pretty quickly, especially joining like a larger team at a tech company. I was saying yes to everything left and right. Any request anyone had of me, I was like, yes, I can do it. I'll make time. I'll sacrifice to get this done. And that, I'm not going to lie, went on for probably like 2 years. So it took time for me to like learn how to prioritize, say no, and really like question, what are the projects that I need to get done? Why are they getting requested of me? Is some sort of training or live virtual instructor led training like really the best use of my time and the best way to kind of train or teach this information? Because, I think a lot of people think that their topic or their product needs a training, but that's not
I love
necessarily
that
the
you
case.
said that. Reminds me of Kathy
Yeah,
Moore. Does this need
that's
to be a training?
that has kind of been like the one of the big things that I've gotten better at saying throughout the years. At first, I saw it modeled to me, so it wasn't something that came naturally to me. It came, year two of instructional design when I had, coworkers that were like, you're allowed to say no, and because I was fresh transitioning, I really wanted to make a good impression, and I wanted to, say yes to everything. But
You want
eventually,
to prove your
because
worth. Like that's what you have
yeah.
to do in the classroom constantly is like prove that you're worthy of whatever. And I think alongside of that, that correlates with imposter syndrome, like not feeling like you
Oh,
belong.
yes. Yeah, totally. Um, and I think for me personally, I kind of needed that to happen to me. Like I know people could tell you right away, make sure that you have boundaries and say no to things, but I think that's part of like transitioning to a new career is, kind of learning on the fly and maybe making those mistakes for yourself and seeing kind of how it makes you feel, and then eventually like growing over time to feel more confident to identify, okay, this doesn't need to be a training, or if it does need to be a training, is it urgent in that I need to stop everything that I'm doing, right now, or can we push it to next quarter?
Right. And
So,
everything's urgent in instructional design world, unfortunately, to everybody. It has to be done tomorrow or it was supposed to be done yesterday.
and that was another one of my like, I guess, mistakes, is like believing that everyone's urgency was my own, when in reality,
It's saying like you're an emergency on your part, mispreparation on your part is not an emergency in my world or
yes.
something like that along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to realize that, you know, everyone has their quarterly goals. So, like, say I have 5 quarterly goals, my other people and other orgs, other coworkers have their goals. And when they're being really urgent about something, it's because their goal is not going to be met because they haven't planned properly for it. But you don't want to say yes or kind of drop everything you're doing for your own goals, because then, you know, you've had a nice plan for everything all along. You don't want to drop everything just because they haven't planned properly. So I've
Right.
gotten better at that over the years as well. But it takes
I'm so glad to
time.
hear that. It's very difficult. It's very difficult because people's priorities are their priorities and they want to get things done, but they need you as part of the equation. And I think a couple of mistakes have come out of the conversation that we just been having over the past 5 to 7 minutes is like not dealing with the trauma of coming out of the classroom and that you experience burnout if you say yes to everything. And then another mistake is not setting boundaries in the new role.
Yeah.
Um, just like you said, being the yes person, saying yes to everything. Teachers are so used to doing that because we want to prove ourselves worthy, but we also on that that creates a situation where we're just working all the time again And that's what we wanted to get away from, right?
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's just one of those things that takes time, you know.
Yeah.
It's a weird response that we have to automatically do that, but you know, it that's kind of what led me to leave the classroom. You know, it's like that burnout. So it's like you need to kind of be proactive in preventing it in your new role.
Yeah. So Brandy had a question I want to answer live before we jump into some more
Sure.
of these mistakes. She wants to know, what are the key tools and skills your mentor told you were needed besides the video editing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, number one was video editing. We were using Articulate at the time, so building things in both Rise and Storyline. But really just being familiar with like what an e-learning platform looks like. It could be Articulate, it could be, you know, it could be any different e-learning platform, but just being familiar with like, what does a e-course or like online learning look like? Because a lot of tools you can kind of figure out how to make your training work, but you know, get familiar with e-learning tools. Also technical writing, I think that was a big one coming from
Yep.
teaching in the classroom. You know, you like sometimes in the classroom, especially like I was teaching middle school, you're kind of writing these like nice fluffy stories, or you're writing these like really engaging essays or something like that. But when it comes to writing for like the tech world, for me, for example, I really needed to like learn how to get straight to the point. You don't need like a nice long
The fluff.
introduction. Yeah, you need
Yeah.
to
The
cut the
fluff.
fluff.
Yeah.
That
I
was,
know the fluff is so hard to cut as a teacher. It
yes,
is.
exactly, because you're like trained to write the fluff, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, it was honestly just a practice, practice, practice. I would write some sort of training content, and then I would pass it off to my coworker who would like be a peer editor, and you know, you'd see these like lines like, you don't need this, you don't need this. And there was like
Mm-hmm.
a Google technical writer workshop that I attended that was really useful. It was free. I think if you just search up Google technical writing program, there is like docs that you can review as well, just to kind of show you what technical writing looks like and how it kind of differs from maybe the writing that you're used to.
It's definitely a different audience for sure
Yes.
that you have to be used to. So one of the mistakes I did put in there earlier is that not having a great mentor, because I don't think some of my great mentors were actually some of my supervisors as I jumped into higher education and going through the different steps of like stepping out of the classroom, learning the back end to ed tech tools and how to properly train people when there was a need for training, like how to talk that talk. And I definitely think some of the technical training or the technical writing would have helped immensely with that. And like, using like iSpring and e-learning authoring tools is just a part of it. I always say the technology comes secondary to how you are as a learner yourself and how you deal with other people and situations and project management. There's a lot of project management and instructional design, and,
Yes.
and just dealing with people on a daily basis, and kind of managing what their roles are and what they're doing and getting information from people, that knowing the right questions to ask.
Totally. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Having the right mentor can really like help you elevate your career and identify things that you didn't even know you don't know.
Right, right. And that those some people were saying this in the chat. It's okay to fail in this aspect. Like you're not going to come in knowing everything. I think that's another mistake too, besides the letting the imposter syndrome win, is that not letting yourself fail.
Yeah,
Um,
and
you
being
know,
scared to ask questions.
Right. You should ask tons of questions. I tell people, like clients that I work with in the past who are transitioning into instructional design, like you have to ask tons of questions, or else you're just going to go into the situation. You're not going to know what to do. And people are going to assume that you know it if you're
Yes.
not asking questions.
Yeah. Faking it till you make it can only take you so far, right?
It totally can.
Like it can get you
Yeah.
to the front door, but then, you know, there's a lot of learning curve. Like I definitely made a lot of writing mistakes, a lot of formatting mistakes, a lot of like, you know, I created a whole training realized that I was building it on the wrong version of some software. And then, if I had asked a question, because I was working at a software company and I was referencing like 2 versions of that software ago, and I had built a training about it. If I had, asked, hey, is this the right thing? Maybe I wouldn't have made that mistake.
Yeah, but that happens a lot, especially when systems are updated as often as they are.
Yeah.
So that's a common mistake. So I want to know from you, like there's a lot of people in the chat that are talking about that they're going to be new to this profession. They're going to be new jumping in. So what advice would you just give, we're giving them mistakes, but what advice would you give people who are starting off in this particular world? Like, what should they be doing? People always ask me, what do I do first? What's the first thing to do?
That's a great question. So I would say 2 things. One is I would say start to craft your resume and your LinkedIn, because I know a lot of my teacher friends are not on LinkedIn. It really helps to just get your presence out there and gives you experience of like seeing what roles are out there for you. And your LinkedIn profile and your resume can kind of go hand in hand. They can mirror each other at first. The stuff you have on your resume, just to get started, can also be the stuff that's on your LinkedIn, and they can look very similar. But I think the second thing, and probably most important, is realizing that, and just like believing that you have more transferable skills than you realize. I was seeing some people in the chat saying, I don't have any of these skills because I'm just a classroom teacher. But I'm going to have to argue that you have more than enough skills. You have curriculum writing, you have curriculum development. If you've led any sort of professional development at your school, you have, experience.
You have training experience.
Yeah, you have experience leading live trainings. If you've ever had to do Zoom, like Zoom teaching, like virtual teaching, that means you have experience leading virtual instructor-led trainings. If you've ever had to manipulate student data, that's another really important skill that, I do that. I have to look at my learner data in the LMS and prove that we, can keep our LMS for, the next year. So all of these things, are transferable. I think people get a little bit intimidated seeing like how it's written as an instructional design role, but really, when it comes down to it, everything you've done in the classroom is very transferable.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And Angela's asking in the chat about when you move from a role as a formal educator to instructional designer, do you consider yourself early career? And I would say no. Like if you have 4 or 5 years experience in the classroom, you're in mid-career at that point for me. And it kind of bothers me when people don't honor that experience per se and be in the classroom, because we're talking about these transferable skills that exist. So I would say that you are not early career and you don't have to. It's and we've all done this. Another mistake is we've taken a lower salary because we thought we were at mid-career.
Yes.
Our early career instead of mid-career. And that's a huge mistake, is to take a lower salary because you think you have to start over again. And you are kind of starting over, but not in the sense where you don't understand the space, because in training and learning and development, it's education. It's very education based in terms of constructivism and the theories that you understood as an educator.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I know I made that mistake when I first started. I severely asked below like what I should have been paid, but luckily the manager who was hiring me actually bumped what I was asking for. She was like, how about you ask me for this amount instead? And so then I was able to ask for a lot more. But that doesn't always happen for people. I was very lucky that she did that for me. But I was
That's a
under
good person
asking,
right there.
Yeah, I was probably asking for 20% less than what she was telling me to ask for. So yeah, it's just something to consider.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that we do so much, like just like educators in the classroom, as instructional designers, we do the jobs of, like, I can name right off the bat like 5 different people, like project management, product stuff. We do, we design curriculum. We do the e-learnings and all that stuff with like graphic design. It's amazing what instructional designers do, and all the different hats do there. So be sure don't take that lower salary because you think your early career. That I put that as mistake number 9. I feel like we're gonna have more than 10 mistakes, but that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think one good rule of thumb is like, if you're really, really nervous and you're asking for X amount of money, always just add 10% and ask
Mhm.
for that, because the worst they can do is like, negotiate with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things when you get to that point in the interview process is you don't realize that they have a range in their head.
Yeah.
And I also too, and I think I talked about this in some of the job postings that I've done, is that I don't apply unless they list salary. I
Yeah.
think that I don't understand why that's a secret anymore. It shouldn't be. So they have a range in mind, and you may be like 5,000 or 10,000 off, which isn't in the grand scheme of things that huge.
Right.
So asking for that higher pay, considering what the job responsibilities are, is okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, and you can use your teaching experience to back that up.
Yeah,
For sure.
definitely.
Yeah. So as you're at this point in your career, I tell myself at this point, I'm becoming the dinosaur in the room, which is totally fine with me. Not that you are. What advice would you have to give people that are looking to, maybe they're at mid-ish career, they maybe want to be senior level or VP or like a director? How do we go about doing that? Like, what are some of the mistakes that we, again, the imposter syndrome, not valuing yourself, there's a huge mistake. So like, what can people do to make sure that they are continually growing and elevating themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually just got this piece of advice from someone that, I work with, who is a few levels higher, who, I'm always like, how do you get to that? I think one is like, find someone who's like a few levels higher than you that you can just ask casually. It doesn't have to be like setting 30 minutes on their calendar, but it could be, someone you just feel comfortable pinging or like walking by and asking, like, so you've been at this level, how did you get there? And one piece of advice I got recently was like, look at the work of the folks that are in those levels and try to mimic it. Like, look at the proposals they're writing, look at like the types of work that they're doing, read through it, see if you can get access to it, and really, start to find ways to do those things yourself. It doesn't have to be like take up your whole career or your whole working day, but find folks that are at the level you want to be at and start to like kind of emulate what they're doing. And you'd be surprised that, like, my writing has continued to improve, because I'm looking at people who are maybe 2 levels higher than me. I'm able to like write proposals that are for projects that are, above my scope, but they're something I'm interested in trying. So, making sure it doesn't have to be necessarily a mentor, but, like someone who you can reach out to and not be afraid to ask, because I think people are very open to sharing more than you'd realize.
Yeah, especially in this community, they definitely
Yeah.
100% are. I don't find that everywhere, in other professions, but people in the learning and development community, you see all the people out on LinkedIn world. They're open, they're
Yeah.
definitely open to share. And you and I did a few presentations at DevLearn, and
Yeah.
we're willing to share our resources and our
Yeah.
thoughts behind it. And like one of the things that mistake number 10, not thinking about how you can grow from individual contributor to leader, like
Yeah.
not seeing yourself in those spaces is really like putting you at like you're putting a ceiling on yourself. You're
Yeah.
putting a cap on yourself. So I think it's really important to see yourself as a leader. Like although you're like, "Oh, I might not be quite prepared for that yet, but like Sam is saying, emulate what those other people are doing and figure out like they didn't just overnight become that leader.
Right.
They had to take appropriate steps, make different mistakes
Right.
to get to that point, or maybe change roles
Yeah.
within.
Yeah. And the person
No,
is like, it's not even necessarily in my org. It can be someone, in a different org that's like at a manager level, or, they might not even have a role that's related to instructional design, but it's like more of like the way of thinking and working and the types of ownership you have. It's good to find people to talk to outside of the instructional design world as well. I think can be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you get a sense of like how their processes and things work as well. And you don't really realize it, but like a lot of the things that we do as instructional designers, Addie and things like that, those processes are built into other like
Yeah,
sectors. It's
totally.
really something, they just don't call it that. They call it
Yeah.
something else.
Yes.
They have
Oh,
some funny name that we don't really
yeah.
care to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I think one of the things that I want to know, and I think it's been in the chat, is like people know that we both have master's degrees, but they want to kind of know like what kind of certificates or things would we recommend
Yeah.
in terms of like starting out maybe as an instructional designer or starting out early on in this career or even at mid-level. Like, is there anything that you particularly recommend? I know iSpring has a few offerings
Yeah.
that I would definitely recommend, free and otherwise, that you would definitely need to invest in. But Sam, I want to hear from you. What are your experiences?
Honestly, I've hired a lot of teachers that don't have, they have their teaching degree and maybe a master's, but it's not necessarily in impacting whether or not I hire them. The more important thing that I usually look for is a portfolio personally. And the reason I look for that is because that's the best way for me to see what types of skills they have. And it's, as a teacher, it's a great way, as you're building a portfolio, it's a great way to learn the skills that you need to become an instructional designer. If you're building a portfolio that contains like a mini course or a short tutorial video, and you put that into your portfolio, you don't have to pay for a portfolio. It could be a free Google site. It could be
Right.
like anything. It can be for free.
The
But as
iSpring page is the one I
yeah,
presented
yeah,
on at DevLearn. It's so
yeah,
easy. It's so easy and it's free. It's so
yes,
easy. Just do it. Yeah.
yeah. You know, personally, for me, as someone who's hired a bunch of instructional designers, if I can see an impressive, not even impressive, if I can see a portfolio, that's going to count just as much, if not more, than like a certificate personally. But I do know that there's various other programs. I'm sure Holly, you might have some that you recommend.
Yeah, I definitely have used Google Sites and then using the iSpring, the pages part of it, because I
Mm-hmm.
found it so easy to just incorporate my stuff. But also too, I tell everybody, and I put a link in the chat a little bit ago about the free stuff, like exhausting the free stuff before you even invest in something that is like a certification or a master's degree or an academy of some sort. Because one of the things, the first questions I tell people ask themselves in getting in this field is, where do you want to be? This
Yeah,
field is vast. Like you can see it for miles and miles. There's education, there's corporate, there's nonprofit, there's government, there's healthcare. It's and every sector sees it differently. So you're going to have to do a little bit of research. So figuring out where you want to be and then taking that and then building your portfolio around that and then
yeah,
exhausting, like I said, those free resources. Like there's so many free things out there, and having conversations with people is free. Not
yeah,
saying that at a certain point you're not going to have to invest in something, because it's going to happen eventually, and you should
right.
honor these people's time and the resources they're providing, but exhaust a free resource.
Totally. And I'm seeing in the comments, what are we putting in our portfolio? Should it be classroom lessons or corporate lessons? I would say, I think as a teacher, you use a lot of software and a lot of technology. Rather than creating a classroom training, I would create like a portfolio project about how to use the software that you're using for your students, so it's more of like a corporate level software tutorial type of portfolio project. So, if you're using like some sort of e-learning software to manage your students, or you're using like Kahoot, create a mini lesson or create a video tutorial about how to set up Kahoot and how to add questions, or, those types of things, rather than specific classroom lessons, because then it's showing that you can kind of teach in more of a way that we're expecting as an instructional designer, if that makes sense.
That definitely 100% makes sense. And I tell a lot of people too, it's not just one thing you're going to be doing in that inside the portfolio, and that portfolio is dynamic. You're going to be changing it as you're developing things and being sure and very aware that you're not sharing that proprietary information or taking out
Right.
anything that's identifiable.
Right.
But yeah, it's gonna change throughout. And I would say start with the things that you've already created that aren't proprietary. Maybe, get a license to iSpring and develop some sort of e-learning that you can put in as a link,
Yeah.
um, so that you can have that portfolio piece. Other thing too, instructional designers, another mistake probably is we're perfectionists. And
100%.
putting out the resume or putting out the portfolio, we need to make sure that we're not trying to be perfect with it. It's just something that's showcasing our work or showcasing our experience. So I think that's like a bonus mistake. I'm
Yes.
putting all these in the chat,
Yes. No,
is
I
being
love it.
perfectionist.
Yes. That,
'Cause
yeah.
it happens daily. It happens daily. Like you want everything to be like just right. And you want to think about, just like when you're a teacher in the classroom, you think about every little question your students could have. You want to think about every little thing that could go
Yep.
wrong.
Yep.
Um, Being a perfectionist is definitely, it's never gonna be perfect for them.
Oh yeah, totally agree. Just
So
looking
as
through
we're
the,
wrapping up here, maybe leaving some time for some other questions. I mean, got about 15 minutes left in the session. I want to know, what is one thing that you hope from this particular conversation that people take away? Like if you had to nail one thing down, like what is it you hope people take away from this conversation?
I hope that people realize and believe that they have more transferable skills than they realize, and that they're more skilled than they realize. They have all the qualifications that they need. It's just a matter of applying it in a different setting, which is like as an instructional designer. There might be things that you need to learn, but it's not out of your scope of being able to learn. So, just trust that you can do this, and know that, your experience gives you a very big leg up on, folks who might not have the background in teaching.
Oh man, we just got a bad review in the chat about this training. Oh, that's not good, Peter. I'm sorry to hear that. I don't think it was a waste of anybody's time or other people feel that way, but I'm sorry that you feel that way. One of the things that I would say for people jumping in is like dealing, like I said, with the imposter syndrome and not thinking that you're good enough. Deal with that first before you jump into this field. And I know that people want more of like this is the way to go and this is the exact path to take. But that doesn't exist in instructional design. It's very abstract. It's always changing. It's ever evolving. So being comfortable with the environment where priorities are shifting and changing, and be able to assimilate to that. This webinar was not only for teachers, and I'm really sad that somebody feels that way. I've never had that kind of feedback in the webinar, and Sam and I are like, big LinkedIn people and sharing resources. So, anyways, I'm gonna let that one roll off my back, and I appreciate all the chat, the conversation that's been happening in the chat. So one thing I want you to take away is that you are good enough and that you can do this, and it's not something. Um, I've been doing this for, so if we count teaching, 2007, like 17, 18 years. It's taken a long time to get here. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Learn something new every day. Yeah, I've been doing this for 6 years, and I definitely learn something new every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now we're going to open it up for some more questions if people have. I'm definitely ignoring that chat. I'm definitely ignoring that comment. Um, So if you all have any specific questions that you want to ask Sam or myself, we have about roughly 10 minutes left. We're happy to answer those. Otherwise, this session has been recorded. All the resources are going to be shared with you, the mistakes. And please, I'm going to put a link. If Sam, you want to put a link to your LinkedIn in the chat as well,
Yeah.
so that you can connect with us out on LinkedIn World. We would so love to hear from you. If you have questions about iSpring or any of the things that, if you need help or guidance, if we can't help you, we'll definitely point you to somebody that can.
Yes. Okay. So I see a few
Oh,
questions.
yeah.
So do you think that there's value in sending a PDF portfolio with a resume? I think if you have the online version, you can just link it on your resume. But if you don't have like a URL, then you can definitely send the PDF portfolio version. But I think generally in like the heading of your resume, just linking out your portfolios is plenty.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me. Oh, everyone's being
Let's see
so
what
nice
else.
about the comment, but
I
it's okay.
know.
I
I just
taught
had to
middle
point that
school.
out.
I've heard worse. I taught middle school. I taught, yeah, it's okay.
I heard worse. This might have just not been like, maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe this just isn't his jam right now. I get it, but kind of put that in the review. Don't put that out in the public.
How do IDs prepare for special needs learners? Is there a training? I haven't
Accessibility
come across.
trainings.
Yeah, like accessibility trainings. I think, making sure that having accessible content as part of your workflow is really important when it comes to creating training materials. Don't have it as an afterthought. Don't have captions or, like video subtitles as an afterthought. Make sure that's embedded in your workflow. Top skills I look for when hiring instructional designers. I really look for writing skills. If you have video editing or graphic design skills, that's also useful. But I think the primary thing is like, I want to see a work sample with how you're writing and how you're structuring like some sort of lesson or some sort of informational or instructional content. Because if I see that you're writing really fluffy writing that I need to parse through to get to the point of, your writing, that I'm like, I'm going to have to do a lot of editing if I hire you.
Right. Right. And we don't want work smarter type, not harder type of situation here.
Yes.
Is it appropriate to showcase your portfolio on an iPad during an interview, an in-person interview? I would say it depends on what you're showing. So are you showing something that you created on the iPad, or is it something that's responsive design? Then fine, if that's what you need to do. I would also say that, just be cognizant of who the audience is and how it's showing on your screen. I know that iOS has recently updated so you can share like your different devices and things, so it's a little bit better than it used to be. But I wouldn't steer away from stuff like that if you really did develop something using the iPad and you're kind of focusing in on that.
Yeah. What are opportunities of ID within K-12? I would say look at ed tech companies, like a Khan Academy or like a Albert or any sort of like e-learning platform that is used by like a K-12 teacher. There's usually instructional design roles because they need someone that's like creating that e-learning content or like those quiz questions or like the archives of material for teachers to use.
That's
Sorry,
a good
I'm just kind
question.
of like speed rounding.
Yeah, me too.
Here.
Yeah, me too. No, I love this. This is like at the end of the interview, like when they ask you questions like, what's your favorite color? If you had to pick one person to have dinner with who's dead or
Yeah.
alive, what would you say? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
These are great questions. Did you answer the one about what is the top skill you look for when hiring an instructional designer?
Yeah, I think mainly writing is like the
Writing.
core thing.
Yeah.
Like instructional writing.
Yeah, I would say it's like how do you deal with people? Because
Mhm.
like the what we had happen in the chat, like how do you deal with those kind of situations where the sneeze or things are difficult? Like that's what I look for in
Yeah.
talking to people. I love that people were sharing their experiences and some different resources that they have loved. What
Mhm.
do you use for needs analysis? We didn't really go into needs analysis too much in this conversation.
Yeah. What was the question?
What what do you use for like a needs analysis? I usually use survey tools, and or like oral interviews with some of the learners, depending upon how big it needs to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, usually just a list of questions that I'm asking my stakeholders or like whoever the audience is that I'm building for.
Yeah.
So this is a commonly asked question that I'm seeing here. Is it okay to use work in your portfolios from contract jobs you've done, or would that be proprietary issues? I get this question so often. I would say, if possible, probably, like, I personally don't use it, or if I do, or if like you were to do that, make sure you make it kind of like hide any proprietary information. I usually recommend just like recreating whatever training you've built, but using some sort of other tool or using some other like company name so that it's not related back
Right.
to a company, because you
You can't trace it back. Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a sticky situation, and depending upon, like, they probably have lawyers and LLCs and stuff like that. You definitely don't want it to be identifiable. It's definitely a slippery slope. And one of the things, I had a student who when a former grad student came to me, and she did an immense amount of work in a contract role, and she's like, I don't know if I'm allowed to share this in my portfolio. I said, worst, what you need to do is go ask the person if you're allowed to share it. Go
Yeah.
back to the person that you work for and see how they feel about it. If they have any sort of policies or things around that, it's like that. You need to go
Yeah.
directly to the source.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
If you want to create an action plan, oh, I like this one from Sarah. What is the difference between a learning designer and instructional designer? I don't differentiate between the two,
I've had the
if I'm
same
being honest.
both titles.
Yeah,
Curriculum
I've had
developer.
instructional technologists. I mean, to me, a lot of them are synonyms of each other. I think in certain companies, they see a learning experience designer as somebody who's more maybe data driven. It depends on the company. But honestly, I don't differentiate between the two. If you're an LXD or you're an instructional designer, to me, it's all the same.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies don't really know the difference, so they just pick the one that they've most recently heard.
Yeah.
So that's why when
They
you're
haven't done
searching
a
on
lot of research.
yeah,
Yeah.
when you're on LinkedIn, just look for all of them. Learning experience
Yeah.
designer, curriculum developer, instructional designer.
Yeah. There. I think one time, like my Luke Hobson listed, like there's over 50 different titles or something like that for that culminate what an instructional designer does. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's see if there's any other questions. If I want to create an action plan to approach the path, do I need put learning tools first, then writing, then like we said, it's really not set in stone like how you approach it. I would say, like, again, technology comes secondary, and through
Yeah.
writing you're going to learn instructional design, so maybe you want to put that first. And I tell people to spend 20 minutes a day on some of
Yeah.
this stuff, because you can become burnt out really quick when preparing for jobs or roles or trying to elevate yourself.
Yeah, and if you just work on creating a portfolio project, you're going to get practice in using all of those interchangeably. Like if you're
Mhm.
creating a mini course or a mini lesson or a job aid, you're going to practice writing, graphic design, maybe video editing all at the same time. So, you know, apply as you're going so that you can actually get like really good hands-on experience.
Yeah. It asked, somebody asked in the chat, is the ID experience and post-secondary ID role help or hamper your application when applying to a corporate role? I transitioned from teaching to higher ed to corporate, and I think it
Yeah.
helped.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt at all, because if we think about it, if we really get down to the nitty gritty of it, higher education is a business, and
Yeah.
they're run like a business, so it's a very corporate feel in certain aspects of it. So I don't think it would hurt at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Now, if they say in the job description, which I see in the past, is people have said, and I called them out on LinkedIn, is that they don't hire former educators, or they don't want anybody with this sort of experience, then maybe you don't want to work there anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, any final thoughts, Sam, for the go of the order of anybody? We had a lot of great questions, a lot of good conversation. I think we shared 12 mistakes, not 10. So you got 2 bonus ones. Lucky you.
Yep.
Like I said, this will be shared out with everybody following the presentation, and as we, get some of the materials together. But we so appreciate you coming and chatting with us and putting all your questions out there.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for asking questions. And yeah, this was so fun.
Yeah, it was. We probably could have done this for 2
I
hours, if
know.
I'm being
Oh,
honest.
easily.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.